You're listening to Manx Radio, and this is Judith Lay welcoming you to the podcast edition of The Archive Room. We're all aboard the steam railway tonight with stories from people who devoted their working life to the smooth running of the trains that was such an important part of island life in years gone by. Cyril Mylchreest, like his father before him, spent his working life on the railways, at Port Soderick and then Union Mills, as he now explains to Charles Guard.
My father started on the Isle of Man Railway as a nipper at Union Mills Station in 1906. And the station master at Union Mills at that time was Mr. G.H. Hogg, who was tragically killed in July 1947. And that was the end of July 47 that I was appointed station master to Union Mills.
How did that accident happen? There weren't many accidents on the railways.
No, it was pretty free from accidents, but that morning it was a train leaving Douglas, and the railway staff called it the Hot Pot Special. That was a train that left Douglas at 10 minutes past 10 and went right through to Kirkmichael, and the passengers enlightened from the train at Kirkmichael and walked through to Glenwillan, had a walk round the glen, and then went into the cafe at Glenwillan for a lunch, then walked back to Kirkmichael station, boarded the train at Kirkmichael for Ramsey. And the ticket then entitled them to either come back from Ramsey to Douglas by train or by bus via the Coast Road.
And that was the train that killed George Hogg?
It was that train, and to this day nobody really knew what happened, whether he took a dizzy spell or just fell between the coaches. Of course, that blocked the road for quite considerable time. And of course there was lots of people here, police and everything like that. It was gone lunchtime before they actually got the train clear. The passengers that were on the train were taken from Union Mills through to St John's, and then on a special train from St John's through to Kirkmichael.
As a young boy, though, did you not want to be an engine driver rather than a station master? How did you get into the railways?
Well, it was in about 1933. There wasn't an awful lot of work in the Isle of Man at that time, and I was a messenger boy in Peel at the time, in a shop in Peel. And this vacancy became at St John's, and my dad, being a railway man and everything else, he thought it'd be a good opportunity to get me in sort of permanent work. So I started at St John's as a gateman and clerk in 1933. Well, of course, we went away for 6 years during the war, demobbed in 1946, restarted work in the May 1946 as a relief clerk, and then I went to Port Soderick as station master at Port Soderick for the summer months. During the winter 46 and 47, I'd done relief work between the different stations, and then when the summer timetable came on in the May 47, I went back to Port Soderick. And in July the 27th of 47, I was appointed station master at Union Mills. But I had been to stay at the Union Mills station before that. For the Sunday after Mr. Hogg was killed, I went there as a relief to keep the station open. And just by the bridge, the road bridge at Union Mills, Mr. Hogg always had a wooden box, and he had some beautiful roses in them. The roses he used for cut flowers for his buttonhole. And I remember on the Sunday opening the office at Union Mills, and there on the desk there was a little vase with 2 cut roses, and they must have been the roses that he was wearing for that week.
Now, when you started at Union Mills, you weren't at that time living in the village, so you later got a commissioner's house. I gather you had to be up early and cycle in sometimes from St John's.
Yes. I lived at St John's when I was first appointed to a station master, and I used to have to cycle from St John's, leave St John's at 20 minutes till 7, to get here. But just after 7:10, when there used to be a light engine leaving Douglas, and that went right through to Peel to bring a train, passenger train or a school train from Peel into Douglas.
And at night, you eventually were able to get the bus home, but you had to make sure your bike was in St John's the next day.
For the next morning's journey. Saturday night, there was a late train, 9 o'clock leaving Douglas, and I would have to wait till the train got to Crosby, and then close the station and wait then for the last bus from Douglas through to St John's.
And your bike would be on the train?
Bike gone on as earlier on in the night and left at St John's station.
Well, let's talk about the station here now. We're sheltering under the bridge which carries the main road through Union Mills, sheltering out of a shower. Over there is the remains of the platform, much overgrown, no doubt, now with trees. As we've just walked down the steps from the road, you tell me there would once have been the buildings. What buildings were there?
When I first took over at Union Mills, there wasn't a walkway down from the road to the railway station. There was steps. And one of the duties that the station master had was to look out for married ladies that had prams with children in and to help them down the steps into the station. But the station was just below. There was an office, a small waiting room with a seat, ladies' toilet and gents' toilet. And then about 5 or 10 yards from the railway station, there was what they called the porter's hut, where they stored your paraffin oil, your cleaning materials, and any such things like that.
What about the decoration of the station, though? You were quite keen on the flowers, weren't you?
When I came to Union Mills, I thought the least I could do was to try to keep the station tidy and make it as pretty as I could, trimming round the large 3 legs of man that was on the bank just by the walkway down into the station. And then on the left-hand side of the station, going into Douglas, there was a bank, and there was 3 flower beds. In those days, we used to fill with anthuriums and lots of other plants that the residents of Union Mills brought down to the station. And underneath the flower beds, there was the lettuce, Union Mills, and they were done like the 3 legs of man in white. Used to keep that tidy, and the start of the summer timetable, it was always nice to get the lettuce and the 3 legs of man tidied up and shining more or less through the black soil, so that it was quite a sight coming into the station. And of course, the flower beds on the top made it that much prettier.
As the evening approached, as the light faded, one of your duties was to light the lamps.
Yes, in the summertime, you'd only light them perhaps for an hour when the night started to get dark. But in the wintertime, particularly on a wet day, when you had to walk, 500 or 600 yards in the rain and then climb the signal and put your signal lamp in, more often than not, walking down to the signal, it would blown out, and then you had to struggle with the lamp inside your coat, striking matches to relight it. Or when you got to the top of the signal box, the signal, to put it in the container, it blew out then. And of course, you had to go down the ladder again to relight it at the bottom. But that was all one of the hazards of the job, and I quite enjoyed working at the railways.
But you had a warm room to go back to.
Oh, yes. In the morning, particularly in the morning, when the workers went into Douglas from Union Mills, they always used to come into the office in the morning and gather around the old stove, which is well stoked up with steam coal. Yes, steam coal.
Now, what's the Bull Road, which is a track that runs up above the back of the station there?
Well, the Bull Road was put in by the railway company as a road separate from the station to lead down to the cattle pen, which was at the bottom end of the station. And the farmers, when they came with the cattle, one of them would report to the station while the other drove the cattle down to the Bull Road and the pen. And you always had cattle trucks at the pen so that the farmers could drive the cattle straight into the cattle truck and wait there for the station master to go down and close the doors and make sure it was safe for transport. Of course, Charles, when the farmers came to load the cattle, the station staff had to make sure that the cattle trucks were clean and fresh straw in the cattle trucks to keep the cattle or sheep or ponies in the condition that they were when they arrived at the station.
What about your hours, and how many weeks a year did you work?
We worked 51 weeks in the year. And of course, the first year, you always worked as a week in hand. So you had to do a full 12 months before you got any holidays. And of course, then in those days, the hours, they were very long. I'll give you an instance here now. This is a timetable that was 1895. The first train leaving Peel in those days was 7:15. And the last train at night time leaving Peel was 10 minutes past 10. And of course, those days you had to be there 20 minutes before the train departed and 20 minutes afterwards. And if it was possible, you had to take an hour off for your meals at lunchtime, and perhaps during the course of the afternoon, if you had a spare period where there was no trains going through, you had to take an hour or 40 minutes, whatever the case may be. The hours were long, but the hours that you got paid was somewhere in the region of about 8 hours 40. One of the stories that was told to me when I first took over Union Mills, there was a Major Harris. He lived on the Strang Road, great railway man and everything. He used to spend a lot of time at Union Mills Station. And in the office, there was a bell, a handbell. And Major Harris gave me the history of the handbell. And the history is that when the mail train arrived at Union Mills and it then departed for Crosby, the station master would go up the steps to the station entrance and ring this bell as such. And the word would get round the village then that the mail had arrived, and anybody that was expecting a parcel or a letter would collect it from Mr. Hogg, the station master. I have here the original whistle, railwayman's whistle, issued to me in 1946 when I first went to Port Soderick, and I brought the whistle with me to Union Mills, and I've kept it as a souvenir of my happy days spent at Union Mills railway station. Now, the procedure with the whistle was that the station master would walk along the platform until he got to the engine, and then he would walk back along the train shouting, "Mind the doors," and then when he was certain in his own mind that everybody was on the train and the doors were fastened properly, he would turn round and signal to the driver that he was ready to proceed, and then he would turn facing the opposite way and give the guard the signal that the train could go. The guard then would wave the green flag and the engine would whistle. The guard would board the train in his own guard's compartment and lean out on the opposite side of the guard's compartment to where he boarded the train and show a white flag to the driver or the fireman that everything was clear. And the train would then proceed into Douglas. Following that, the station master would then go into the office and ring the crossing gates at the quarter bridge to let the gatekeeper know that the train had left Union Mills, and his duty then was to open the gates straight away for the train to come.
It was a busy morning when David Callister visited Ballasalla Halt, enabling Station Master Peter Craine to show David how to manage the simultaneous arrival of 2 trains.
What happens here when the 2 trains come in?
Well, I will receive word from Castletown when the train has left, and I've got 7 minutes for that train to arrive here. I can also see from here to Ballawoods, and it takes 3 minutes for a train to get from Ballawoods to here. So I then have to decide which train comes in first, because under the rule book, only one train can arrive at the station at any one time.
But you've got 2 lots of tracks here they can pass, can't they?
Oh yes, they do pass here.
But you've got to have one in first before the other, haven't you?
Yes, one train has to arrive at the station and pull to a halt before the other one is allowed in. So it's a matter of timing as to which arrives first, the one from Douglas or the one from Castletown.
Well, now the station master here, Peter Craine, has just picked up, what do we call this piece of wood with a brass nameplate on, Peter?
Well, this is a staff. The railway operates on what's known as the staff and ticket system. Being a single line track, it's necessary for a driver to have this as the authority to proceed with the full knowledge that he knows that there's nothing coming in the opposite direction, because a train can't proceed without the staff.
This system's been in use always on Manx Railways, has it?
It's always been in use on the Isle of Man Railway. Well, any single line railway operates on this system, because in the early days they used to send a man, a pilotman as they call them, but of course it was cheaper to have a piece of wood than to have a man.
Yes, that's a fairly old staff by the look of it too.
Yes, it may possibly be the original one. It's very worn, the brass lettering. Some of the newer ones that have, been made up recently, they've just got plastic lettering.
Well, now this is the train that's drawn in from Douglas on its way to Port Erin, drawn by the Maitland. That's an old engine, is it?
Well, the Maitland was one of what we call the larger boiler locomotives which were purchased from 1905 onwards. Maitland was one of the directors. Dalrymple Maitland was the director of the railway about that period, and the locomotive was named after him. Of course, it's been reboiled several times, and it's now in first-class condition, of course.
Now the driver's doing a bit of maintenance here as well with his oil can, I see.
Well, at the moment he's oiling up the bearings, one of which is running slightly warm, so he's giving it a good soak with oil.
4 carriages on here now, and here's the next train now coming in from Port Erin End.
This is number 12, the Hutchinson. I've got in my hands the staff which authorised the train to proceed between Ballasalla and Castletown. But instead of giving this staff to the other driver, I've given him a ticket, because I've got another train coming through following him. So the first train goes on the ticket, and the second train goes on the staff. Train left 10:47, the other arrived 10:42.
Well, there we are, 2 trains in and out, like clockwork there, Peter, but you're not really finished yet, because I see you've got papers and sheets to fill in here and reports to do.
Well, yes, I have to keep a daily register of trains, the time of arrival and time of departure, the locomotive number, the number of coaches, the estimated number of people who arrive and depart.
Well, it seems to be as popular as ever, the old Manx steam train, doesn't it?
Yes, we're quite busy. I hope it continues like that.
And now a couple of stories involving travel but not on the trains. When David Callister talked with Arthur Underhill about his time in the island's police force, he discovered that in the 1930s there was no police transport, and, unlikely as it seems today, thumbing a lift from a member of the public sometimes was the only option. David was curious to know if Arthur had ever resorted to doing this himself.
I certainly did, and it was productive, but it was rather strange. I was night section sergeant, and I was walking over towards Broadway, and it was still very busy, in the summer, and it was a lovely night. And Sergeant Brown was at Broadway, and he was due to go off. And I was in the roadway. I don't know why the heck I was in the roadway. I shouldn't have been in the roadway, but I was. And a car came along, and it had no lights on. Well, in those days, we couldn't be bothered with that sort of thing at that time of the night because we had the thing was far too hectic. Yeah. So what we used to do, we used to point to the lights, you see, and invariably they would be switched on and you'd sign them on. Yeah. Well, I pointed to the lights and he didn't switch them on, but he drove straight at me. So I jumped out of the way and I thought, how am I going to catch him? So there was a car came along, a lovely big Jaguar car. So I stopped them. And I knew this chap. Yeah. And I said, look, follow that car. So he said, right. So we went. And this car, he knew we were after him. And when he got as far as Broadway, he realised that there was a problem somewhere. And he turned and went up Broadway and he went up on the pavement. Yeah. Fortunately, there were no visitors there at the time, and he didn't knock anybody over. And then by this time, Sergeant Brown knew what was happening, and he'd got a car too. And the two of us were following him, and he was weaving about all over going up. And at St Ninians, I thought, now, what'll he do now? And he swung down Bray Hill. And here we followed him all the way along Quarterbridge Road, right along to the Quarterbridge. Now I thought, oh no, he's not going to go back into town again. And they swung round about into town, going back into town. So at the bottom of Daisy Hill, they, for some reason, they hit the curb and they turned the car over. Well, we were able to catch up with them. And one chap was hurt and he had to go to hospital. And we got the other fellow out. And he had the most wonderful set of housebreaking implements I've ever seen. And they were on their way up to Onken to breaking into some place, we found out. But they never achieved that. And but that was the only time I can ever recollect I had to get the assistance. And I picked a right good car because he was saying to me on the way, well, I pass him. No, I said, don't do that. He'll crash into you. Yeah. And but the public were very good. They were always very helpful. Yeah.
And finally, when David Callister met up with Hector Duff to talk about his time in the police force, the conversation began with stories from Hector's younger days growing up in Sulby.
Now, in them days, there was the Manx Electric Rail. We used to bring people up to the bungalow, and they had small coaches, or charabancs we called them in them days, and they used to drive the people down to the Halt. At Thaltawill, there's a path going up through the glen, up to the top of the glen, just beyond the entrance to the reservoir, and that's called the Halt. There's a little hut there, right? And they used to walk down through the glen to Thaltawill, and they'd have a lunch there, and then they could either walk back up again and get the coach, or they could get, in them days, a horse and trap down to Sulby Glen. Oh, right, yes. And in them days, there used to be about 3 landaus, they were called, travelling from Sulby Glen railway station up to Thaltawill. There used to be Johnny Redpath and Johnny Craine. Johnny Craine, he was called Johnny the Mitch. He was Mitch, it mean match actually. He was always saying, you've got a Mitch, you've got a Mitch. And sometimes he was called Mr. Swan Vester. Johnny the Mitch, we always called him. Yeah. And sometimes he would have... If he had 4 people as a rule within the landau, but sometimes he had 6 in, he would get one of us young fellas to go with him. We'd walk behind, and then if he had to stop on any of the hills, he had a big block attached to a chain which would go to the wheel to give the horse a rest. Yes. So we got to ride back sometimes in the landau. It wasn't too bad really. The biggest hill was the approach to Thaltawill by what we used to call the rabbit catchers' houses there.
The rabbit catchers' houses? Well, that's a story for the next time that we're together, because this is the last in the present series of the Archive Room, so it just remains for me to thank our archivist, Tim Price, for his help with research and production, and my thanks to you for listening. If you've missed any earlier programmes or you'd like to share them with friends, you'll find them all available as podcasts at manxradio.com to download and listen whenever it suits you. I can't sign off by saying till next week, but Howard Hampton can still say
so long, you sir.
The Nation Station.